Okay. Thank you guys again for coming. Today we're going to be talking about flowers and animals. We'll be looking at the organisms of angiosperms, which are your flowers, and kingdom Animalia, which are your animals. We'll be learning about them and what makes them different and how they live and reproduce. So first of all, we're going to be talking about the angiosperms, which is any plant that has a flower or a fruit. So this is, as you were here last week, you should know that this is the most diverse plant group. There are more angiosperms than any other plant group between gymnosperms, mosses, or ferns. Angiosperms are number one in terms of amount, in terms of diversity, and in terms of adaptations. So they are the most adapted plant on Earth. So first of all, we're going to learn about the flower structure. They are the reproductive structures of plants. So they use flowers to reproduce. They're adapted to send and receive pollen from one flower to another of the same species. Keyword, same species. They can't reproduce like a dandelion cannot reproduce with a sunflower. They're two different species, just like a bear cannot reproduce with a deer. Same thing. That flowers also have their own species, so they can only reproduce with their same species. Flowers also, there's just a series of modified leaves. Sometimes they're different colors, sometimes they're the same color, but they're all used for the same purpose, to attract pollinators for pollination, which we'll get into what that is. And these leaves are arranged in rings or whorls. That's just generally the order of how they're arranged. There are several types of pollination, which just simply means pollen transferring from the male reproductive structure of the stamen to the female reproductive structure of the pistil. There's many ways on how pollen can travel. If it's windy out, it can travel through wind. If animals come in contact with it, pollen can travel by animals. Or pollen can travel by water as well. So there's many ways on how pollen can travel from one form or one plant to another. It just depends on where that plant is and what it is best able to do. Here's another example of animals, or at least insects, pollinating. The bumblebee pollinates that red clover that you see. Maybe you guys have probably seen that before outside. It's a very specific bee to a very specific flower. Animal pollination is usually with insects, like I just said. Also, other flying animals, like maybe fruit bats or hummingbirds, can help as well. Really anything that flies is going to be the best for animal pollination. Mostly insects, sometimes fruit bats, hummingbirds, smaller birds, things like that. And here is the flower structure. This is something that's very important that all you guys definitely need to know. This is just a very basic flower structure. And most flowers tend to look like this. In the center, this yellow structure here, this entire thing, which is made up of the stigma, style, and ovary, is the female reproductive structure. Does anybody know what the female reproductive structure is called, which makes up the stigma, style, and ovary? When an ovary is part of it, does anybody know the entire structure, which is made up of the stigma, style, and ovary? You're close, though. Starts with the letter P. It's not on here. Does anybody know? Good job, Michaela. You got it. This stigma, style, and ovary, which is the female structure of the flower, is called the pistil. P-I-S-T-I-L. And that's made up of those three parts: stigma, style, and ovary. Very simple. Stigma is the sticky part on top. Style is the tube. Ovary is the cells inside of the pistil. So that's female. The male reproductive structure is this thing right here. which is made up of the anther, the tip of the male structure, and the filament. Does anybody know what that is called? Which is the male reproductive structure made up of the made up of the anther and the filament. Anybody know what that is? Starts with the letter S. All right, good job, Ryder. Good job remembering. That male reproductive structure, it actually has the word men in it. Give you a better way to memorize it. It's called the stamen. And the stamen is made up of the anther and the filament. Pollen is the cell, which is found at the very end of the anther. They look just like little dots. Pollen is always found at the end of the anther of the flower. So what you need to know here, absolutely without a doubt, you got to know the female structure. It's called the pistil, and it's made up of the stigma, style, and the ovary is the cell. And then the male part is called the stamen, which is the anther and the filament. The pollen is the cell for that one. Okay, so here's your flower structure again. You can see the pistil, which is the center part of that flower right here. And then you can see many anthers and filaments all along the outside with the pollen being stuck to it. Again, here's the pistil, the middle female part of the flower, and here are the little anthers and filaments of the male reproductive structure of the flower. All right, so we're going to talk about pollination. Pollination is very simply just when pollen gets transferred from the stamen to the pistil. Very simple. Pollen grains contain the male gamete. We know pollen is male. When you see pollen in the air, that's male reproductive cells from flowers in the air. They're picked up by a pollinator and transferred to another flower. Plants tend to specialize in pollinators as well. This ensures the pollen is delivered to the same species of plant. Remember how I said that? This very specific bee works with this very specific flower. No other insects work with that flower. Plants tend to specialize in pollinators. That usually means a specific insect is used for a specific flower. And they both work with each other. The flower adapts and changes with that insect, and the insect adapts and changes with the flower because they both help each other out. Do you remember what that's called back in Module 4, where both species help each other out? Remember that? It's a form of symbiosis. Does anybody remember that, where they both benefit? A little bit of an EOC review. What's that called, where two species benefit? Good job, Talea. You're right. And it doesn't even matter if you guess and you're wrong. So you are correct, though. Mutualism. That's where both species benefit. Commensalism is where one benefits, the other one doesn't care. And parasitism is where one benefits, the other one gets harmed. But this would be a good example of mutualism right here. Good job. Good remembering. All right, so then we got more about pollination. Remember how I said it's a specific insect for a specific flower. Well, some flowers have highly specialized to encourage only one type of insect. Like this one, the foxglove flowers are used for a very specific type of bird that helps pollinate these flowers. Here's another one. A small skipper on a marsh thistle. This moth or butterfly is very specific to work with this flower. They both help each other out, and that's the only thing that each helps each other out with. So it's just another example of a specific flower with a specific bug. Here's another example. A specific flower, marsh thistle, specific bug, honeybee. They each help each other out. More about pollination. Most flowering plants are hermaphroditic, which means they can self-pollinate or cross-pollinate. So we have a flower here. Try my best to draw a flower. Okay, and we have a flower over here. Same species, they look similar. Okay, if the pollen transfers on the same plant, that's called asexual reproduction, or that's also called self-pollination. But if that pollen transfers over to another flower to pollinate, that's called cross-pollination, or sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is just the pollen lands in the same flower. It can reproduce by itself, or if the pollen goes on to a different flower and reproduces, that's sexual reproduction, or cross-pollination. Flowers are hermaphroditic, which means they can do either one, asexual or sexual reproduction. This depends on what happens. Now, pollination is not the same thing as fertilization. Pollination is just simply the pollen grain landing on top of the stigma. That's it. That is pollination right there. So that's pollination. Very simply just pollen landing on top of the female reproductive structure. When that happens, though, the pollen grain will release its cells, its gametophytes, and its cells will go down into the style, it'll get into the ovary area, and then it will fertilize the egg or the ovule. That is what fertilization is. Fertilization is pollen plus ovule. If you get that, what does that create? What does pollen plus an ovule create? What's the beginning of the new plant called? It's a very common name. Does anybody remember? We've done a DBA with me before, we went over it. Remember, pollination is just pollen on top of the stigma. But fertilization is when that pollen cells fertilizes the ovule. Pollen plus ovary will create, it is an embryo, but the common name is a seed. Yeah, it's an embryo inside of the seed. That's exactly what it is. See, here's your embryo sac, which is the yellow part, and it's inside of this. This entire thing is a seed, or a fruit containing seeds, which is the beginning of the new plant. So what I want you guys to understand, pollination, fertilization are different. Pollination is where the pollen just lands on top of the flower. Easy. Fertilization, though, is when that pollen cells travel into the ovary and fertilize it, create a seed. That's fertilization. Here we go again. Pollination is not equal to fertilization. They're different. The male gamete has to get to the egg cell. That's the fertilization part. The egg cell lies in the ovule, in the ovary at the center of the flower. The pollen grain germinates on the stigma. It grows a pollen tube down the style, and the male nuclei travel down the pollen tube to the ovule. Exactly what I just said, but in words. So pollination is just this process where it lands on top, but then it will germinate and create a tube where the cells will travel and fertilize the egg. That's what fertilization is. Okay, here's a close-up picture. So this right here, guys, see this right there? I'm just going to zoom in on that right here. So we have the embryo sac, and this entire thing is the ovary or ovule. And what happens is the egg and cells will come in and fertilize, and this will create and grow to form a bigger seed. So that's where fertilization takes place, in the ovule of the actual flower. Okay, so here's more pollen grains. Not the best for allergies right now, but that's what they look like. Okay, and then also from flower to fruit. Sometimes flowers, when they are pollinated, they will also bud off and form different fruits. That's okay, because they want animals to eat the fruits, because then the seeds will pass through their digestive system, be released with all of this extra fertilizer or fecal matter, and then that seed will be able to germinate and grow. So flowers think about that. They're okay with animals eating their fruit because it helps pass their seeds to different areas. And one last thing, remember, flowers are very smart. They want to spread out their fruits and seeds to different areas to make more of themselves. So sometimes plants can have an explosive dispersal. They can release based on almost like a little minor explosion. Animal dispersal can be, if you guys have ever walked out in some grass and got all those little sticky seeds all over yourself or all over your shorts, that's a tactic that some grasses and some plants use to pass their seeds. They want to stick them to you so they can drop off in other areas. Also, I'm sure we've seen these flowers before. That happens with wind dispersal. A little bit of wind, and it carries those seeds everywhere. So plants are smart. They're smarter than you think. And they're trying to pass their fruits and seeds around to make more of themselves. And they have many different tactics on how they can do that. Okay, so go ahead and ask any other questions you guys have. Catlin, yeah, if we can try to make it as close to the topic as possible. So if you guys have any questions about flowers, go ahead and ask those, and then we're going to get into animals in about 10 seconds. All right, so moving on to animals. In Catlin, to answer your question, when two species develop similarly, that can be called a couple different things. That could be called convergent evolution, where they begin to form almost into their own similar species. It's also be called coevolution if they were close together. But without meeting, it's more like convergent evolution. That's usually what that's called. Okay, so now we're going to talk about animals. And there are 5 types of animals. And they all have backbones. That's what makes them really an animal or a vertebrate. We have fish. We have amphibians. We have reptiles. We have birds. And we have mammals, for sure. I would also say in terms of adaptations, well, they all have their extreme adaptations. But first on Earth was the fish, at least fossil record shows. Then second were the amphibians, which began to colonize land, at least a little bit. Third were the reptiles on Earth. Fourth were the birds. And then fifth to take over are the mammals, including ourselves. So these are the 5 animals on Earth. I have a tattoo of one of those animals, which happens to be this one on my back, which is the scarlet macaw from Costa Rica. All right, so animals with backbones. Those are what they are. They're called vertebrates. They include many different kinds of animals. They can be found just about anywhere. Oceans, rivers, forests, mountains, deserts. It doesn't matter. Animals pretty much have taken over almost every area of this earth, which is good, us included. Animals with backbones can be broken up into smaller groups, and those 5 are fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. First of all, we're going to talk about fish, which came on Earth first in the fossil record. They're the largest group of vertebrates, probably because our oceans are the biggest area on Earth. So that kind of makes sense. They come in many sizes and shapes. We know that. They're covered with scales that protect them. So that's kind of like the skin or scales. They have fins that help them steer and balance in water. And their body temperatures varies with the water. So their body temperature is whatever the water temperature is. And we know that fish breathe underwater through gills. Does anybody know the largest fish on Earth? I ask my kids this all the time. But anyways, does anybody know the largest fish on Earth? Even bigger than the great white shark. I swam with this last July. Coolest experience ever. It was not a great white shark, though. Nope, that's a mammal. The name of the largest fish on Earth is, somebody else is going to guess? You got it, Talea, is the whale shark. They live in tropical areas. They're about 20 to 30 feet long. They're giant, but they are harmless. They eat algae and really small things in the water. So if you see them, you can actually jump off your boat and go swimming with them, which is exactly what happened last summer. Really cool experience. Amphibians. Amphibians are the next one. These ones, body temperature varies with their surroundings. So they're also the same temperature as whatever's around them. Amphibians hatch from eggs, and they can live on land as an adult. That's new. Fish can't live on land as an adult, but amphibians can. Young amphibians breathe through gills, like fish, but adult amphibians breathe lungs, like reptiles, birds, and mammals. So amphibians are like your middle person. It's like halfway in the water, halfway out of the water. This was your first species to be on land millions and millions of years ago. And most of them have smooth, moist skin. Reptiles. Reptiles are many different things, but they include different snakes and lizards and turtles and tortoises. They can move at various speeds. They lay their eggs on land. They have dry skin. So in terms of amphibians, their eggs are in the water. Reptiles' eggs are on land. Instead of being smooth, moist skin, they usually have dry, scaly skin. They can include animals as large as a crocodile. And their body temperature varies with the environment. So they are also cold-blooded. Just like fish, just like amphibians, reptiles also are the same temperature as what the air temperature is. So with that said, they like to live in hot, dry areas like deserts and warm, wet, tropical rainforests. That's where they usually live most. Does anybody know the largest reptile on Earth? Or want to guess? Yeah, that one, you got it. In the island of Komodo in Indonesia, it is the largest reptile on Earth and the closest thing to what dinosaurs were like when they colonized on Earth 65 plus million years ago. But the Komodo dragon is the largest one today. Yep, and the turtle is a reptile. Also a tortoise. Turtles, while we're on topic with that, turtles versus tortoises. Tortoises are dry and they live on land. Turtles are wet and they usually live in the water. So there's a difference between that. All right, next were the birds. And genetically and evolutionarily speaking, the closest relative to the dinosaurs after they went extinct. So if you want the closest thing to look like a dinosaur, look at the birds. They are the closest things to what they were. They lay hard-shelled eggs that hatch in a nest, just like dinosaurs did. There are about 9,000 current types of birds on Earth right now. That number is dropping. Birds are vertebrates that have wings, and they are covered with feathers. No other animal has this feature. No other animal has feathers. But some ancient dinosaurs used to have feathers, which is even more of a reason why they are evolutionarily similar. The bird's skeleton is very light in weight, and this helps them fly. So if you ever look at bones of a bird, they're hollow. They're not heavy. They're light. That's why birds can fly and mammals can't, or at least most mammals can't. It's because they have very hollow, lightweight feathers and bones. We have very heavy bones. That's why we can't fly. Birds range in size from as small as your finger to as large as a human. Does anybody know the largest bird on Earth? Good job, Cameron. Yep, it is the ostrich from Africa. Largest bird on Earth. It is a flightless bird, but it is the largest bird on Earth. And last but not least, mammals, including ourselves. They include a wide range of animals. That could be even us, the apes, the lions, kangaroos, the bats, you name it. I mean, mammals is a pretty big category. Their young does not hatch with an egg, but actually they're placental mammals. Most of them are placental, which means growing and developing inside the mother. Humans are mammals too, but they have more hair than we do. So animals tend to have more hair than humans just because we wear clothing. That's why we don't need as much hair for protection as other animals do. Their hair keeps the animals warm. We wear clothing, so that kind of substitutes that. And they feed their milk and take care of their young, or they feed with milk and take care of their young for a long period of time. And Talea, tell your mom that we are thinking of her and early congratulations too. So that's it about mammals. We kind of know about them because that's the category that we're in as well. Now, all animals, though, have similarities, and this is a DBA question, so take note of it. All animals, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, they are all heterotrophic, which means they all have a mouth in order to eat, right? All animals have a mouth, so we're all heterotrophic. Autotrophs are your plants. They all reproduce through sexual reproduction, which means every single animal needs 2 animals to reproduce. They all have eukaryotic cells. Remember, prokaryotic cell is like bacteria. Well, all animals are made up of eukaryotic cells. Multicellular organisms, that means every single animal is made up of more than one cell. All animals can respond to a stimulus, which means they can all respond and be able to move. And they all have an internal body system as well, like a digestive system, a respiratory system, a skeletal system. All animals have internal body systems as well. So just make sure you know that all of these are similar. Now, to leave you off with a couple last statements, we know about the dinosaurs. They went extinct in a mass extinction 65 million years ago. What a mass extinction is some event or some long-term event that kills off over 90% of the animals on Earth. There's been 5 mass extinctions, as we know so far, in the history of our world. 5. Scientists today believe we are currently in the 6th mass extinction. Now, we don't see meteors flying to Earth, or we don't see volcanoes going off or anything like that. This 6th mass extinction is caused by us, humans. Out of 100% of all the animals on Earth, so you take all the animals on Earth and put them into a graph, 100%. 97% out of 100 is cows, pigs, and humans. That's it. The other 3% are all the other animals that you can possibly think of on Earth. 97% are humans, cows, and pigs. That we grow cows and pigs in order for food. So what that's saying is, over the last 30, 40 years, almost 90% of the animals on Earth have gone away and died mainly because of our actions. So it's just good to know that, but it's also good to kind of think for the future. What can we do to rebound these animals? And scientists are already doing that. So they know that we're the cause of this 6th mass extinction, but at the same time, we're also a solution if we do the right thing. So that's just something to keep in mind while we end today about the animals. Hopefully in your lifetime you'll see more and more of these species of animals versus less and less that I've seen. So again, thank you guys for coming. I hope you guys all had a great time learning about flowers and learning about animals. We're all done for today. Just make sure about the flowers, you know what pollination is, you know what fertilization is, and you know what the types or the parts of the flower are. And same thing with animals. Know your similarities, know the 5 types and how they're different. Okay? So thank you guys again for coming, and have a great day. We will see you here next time where we're going to be reviewing for the Module 6 DBA.